And now I'm going to hand it over to Sandy.
Wonderful. Let me switch over to my presentation. It'll be just a moment here. Okay, you should be seeing my screen.
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you. Thank you for letting me be here. I am an MVP, a Microsoft MVP. I'm a Microsoft 365 MVP, but technically I've received that award because of my contributions in the PowerPoint community. So I'm passionate about helping others understand how they can create better presentations. And something I learned, I've been doing this for 20 years. Something I learned way in the beginning was that my clients, in order to sell them on great slide design, I couldn't be using words like "it looks great," "I like it," "it's better to do it this way." All of that stuff, "it's great design." They didn't care. It all fell flat. It was when I started reading a couple of great books, and I'll get into that in a sec, about the science behind presenting and what works and what doesn't work, that they started listening to me. It lended all kinds of credibility to the work I do. But more importantly to you, what it does, it will help you create better slides. And I'm going to tell you something, you're not going to be opening PowerPoint to start it, okay? So here's what I'm going to cover today. I am going to go through the science behind good slides. I'm going to then take the information that we learned from that science and help you understand some pitfalls, what you can avoid when you're designing your slides. Help you on the positive side, some tips and tricks that you can embrace, some good things. And then at the end, we won't have time to literally practice what we're preaching. I'd love to have a lab, but I haven't included that in this hour. But I will leave you with some tools that you can use going forward to help create your presentations. So as we get started here, I'm going to ask the group, I don't have the chat open here, and maybe Chris, you can help me with this if people do respond. But when you start a presentation, what is the first thing you ask yourself when you're starting to create your presentation? What do you ask of, if you don't, I'll give you a hint. Who's your audience? Clearly, if you don't know who you're presenting to, and I don't mean you're presenting to Jack, I mean maybe we're thinking about the demographics. If you're in a large audience, for example, is it an IT audience? Are you presenting to your boss? Are you presenting to another influencer? It's really, really important to understand the demographics and their pain points. So in order to be effective in your presentation. So ask yourself, who am I presenting to? If it's all of the above, that gets kind of confusing, doesn't it? I've got to present to the CEO of the company and he has this objective in mind. I've got to present to an influencer so that they'll move forward. They'll champion my presentation going through. I've got all of that. Those are very, very important. But one thing that people often forget when creating presentations is to ask the question, what does my audience have in common? And the answer to that simply is they're human. They're human, and going forward, I'd like you to consider when you create a PowerPoint presentation, if you use something else, if you use Keynote, if you use Haiku, if you use Prezi, you want to consider the research that's been conducted on human physiology that tells us in order for a presentation to be successful, people have to learn. They have to be able to retain the information. Basically, what it is you have to remember that PowerPoint audiences are people too. So let's talk about how people learn. And before I get into that, I'm going to source some material for you here. Back when I started this, I mentioned the science that I learned that helped me move forward with my career with my clients. And there were two books that I read. It was Richard E. Mayer's The Cambridge Handbook of Multi-Learning, very in-depth research on how people learn in an audiovisual environment. Cliff Atkinson took that information and he made it simple and relevant in a presentation context with his book, Beyond Bullet Points. So I would recommend either one of those if you want to do some more reading. So starting with Mayer's research, he reminds us that there's a concept of memory, that in order for us to be impactful in a presentation, we have to impact users' memory. And there are three types of memories that we have to consider. First, there's sensory memory. That is the limited amount of sensory information that we receive from everything, not limited, unlimited sensory information that we receive from everything around us, from colors to sounds to smells. That is unlimited, and that is very, very superficial. On the other end, the second type of memory is long-term memory. And we as presenters, or anyone who wants to convince somebody of our opinion, who wants to sell in an idea to make money, to make sure that we get the support we need in our new IT program, we need to get that information into the long-term memory in order for us to have an impact on the audience. In between those two, and this is the toughie, is that short-term memory, that working memory. Working memory acts as a guard between all that sensory stuff that's coming in and transferring it to long-term memory. As a matter of fact, Cliff Atkinson describes the short-term memory or the working memory as being like the eye of a needle. It's almost impossible to get information through it. It makes your brain be selective about what it retains and moves into the long-term memory category. So here's an example of how that works or doesn't work in the case of a typical slide in a presentation. This is a real slide, and it probably doesn't look that different from many of the slides that you've seen. Somebody might describe it as being very, very graphic. But what happens is this eye and the needle, the short-term memory, takes a look at the information that's on that slide, and you're going to have one of three outcomes. Either you're not going to learn from that slide, your audience isn't going to learn from that slide. They're going to have fragmented learning. They're going to pick up bits and pieces of it. They might remember the headline Benchmarking 2.0, but they might not remember what Benchmarking 2.0 was all about. Ultimately, if you're going to take the time to present something and you're going to take up your audience's time to present something, you're going to want them to be able to retain the information. So moving forward, something to consider is that reading text on slides depresses learning. Now, I just read this slide, but I read it word for word. This type of reading slides does not work. So let's remember that and what the impact it has, or what another concept of research in audiovisual learning is. There are two channels where information passes through short-term memory. It's the verbal channel that goes through your ear, technically, goes through your ear and into your brain. And then there's a visual channel. That's what you're seeing. Here's where we run into trouble with, then I should say, if everything goes right and you're working with the verbal channel properly and you're working with the visual channel properly, you're going to have retention in the long-term memory. But if you have a slide like this one, what happens, and this is, I'll admit, I often stumble over this because it's kind of a complex theory. The visual channel is what I see, and I am seeing text, but my brain interprets that as not visual. My brain interprets that as verbal. So when I'm speaking, you're listening to me, and that's going through the verb, that's verbal. When I'm Reading text, that's verbal. It's not visual. If you go back to this slide, remember we have to have visual and verbal. If we go with this approach, they're both verbal. And what that means is the human brain cannot listen to what the presenter is saying and read what's on the slide at the same time. It's humanly impossible. So you're not going to get that long-term retention. As you look at the slides on the right, you're either going to get zero retention or only fragmented retention. So here's how that plays out. When you start to remove text from your slides, this first one's a pretty good number. There's a 28% increased chance of retention, that people will remember things. And that kind of doesn't sound that exciting. It's this next number that really excites me. And that's 79% more of your solutions are applied. So people are retaining the information they need to take it away and act on it. They can act on it. They will, maybe the CEO will approve your budget for 2013, or I'm sorry, 2021. The influencer will run with this information and get other people excited about it. You're going to get more action with less copy on your slides. So those are the two scientific theories that I learned early on that helped me be more successful in creating presentations. I created it for my clients. You can do this for creating your own presentations. So how can you take that science? What can you do to avoid some common errors that we can all stumble over? And of course, the first one is loading your slides with bullet points. This one is not a surprise. Does anyone here know what the #1 complaint worldwide for 20 years? I think this has been. A friend of mine does an annual survey with what the #1 the complaints are about PowerPoint. What's the #1 complaint worldwide? Throw it out there, you know, and unmute yourself if you want to.
Too many words.
Too many words, okay? And too many words leads to reading the slide. People read the slide. It's human nature, whether it's me, the presenter, or you in the audience, it's human nature to want to read what's on the slide. And remember, I said with that dual channel thing, if you're reading the slide, you can't remember anything. So, and it makes you as a presenter not appear to be the expert you are, because it makes you appear to be reading the slides, whether you are or not. So anyway, here's a slide full of bullet points. It's neat and tidy, but there's a lot of stuff on there. It's hard to follow along. I bet you don't know what I'm talking about because you're trying to read that slide. So there are some steps that we can take to make this bullet point slide a little bit more, what's the word, palatable. Gar Reynolds, if he would hear me doing this, he'd be so upset with me because he doesn't want a bullet point on a slide. But I'm a realist, and I know sometimes you have to use them. So you start taking away information, but you don't have to throw away that information. You can put it all in your notes. It's there for you to practice or to have on your monitor when you are delivering your presentation. So it's still there. And then the next thing you do is you are left with this simple slide. It is white. It has 3 bullets. One might not call it exciting, but you know what? Your audience is going to be able to follow along. They're going to know that they need to avoid information overload by using notes instead of slide text, by limiting bullets and limiting the words on their slides. Using these thought starters makes you, the presenter, the content expert. Content expert. So if you must use bullets, limit your bullets on your slide to 3 to 5 bullet points, and each bullet point limited to 3 to 5 words. Now you're going to probably hear another rule. That's the 5-word rule or the 7-word rule. It doesn't matter as long as you're following a rule. I start low so that I could cheat a little bit if I have to. Here's an example. Scope considerations. I've got 4 bullet points. I'm within the guidelines that I've established. I'm cheating a little bit, I think, on the number of words per bullet point. It works, but then we're going to fall into that dual channel thing again, because people are starting to read that. You're starting to read that slide and you're not able to listen to me. So here, let's start to make it graphic. Let's start to make it easier to follow along. We use this very sophisticated term in the presentation industry when it comes to organizing content on slides. We chunk it out. We put our content in chunks. And literally what I did was I used SmartArt to take these bullet points and convert them to these Monopoly cards. That's what I call them. I know they have a formal term in PowerPoint, but it makes it a lot easier. Now you can follow along when I start talking about assumptions, exclusions, constraints, and interdependencies. You may be tempted to read the content in the lower level, but at least it's less distracting than the page full of bullet points. But as a designer, I take this one step further. I follow the law of what do we call it? Vicinity. It's prognance, in which I put a description next to a graphic. That law says that people can remember information more if they have a text next to a graphic. And so here I have assumptions, exclusions, constraints, and interdependencies. I can talk to each of those. The audience can follow along, and they have a graphic to help them remember exactly what it means to consider when it comes to scope. The next error, pitfall, is what a gentleman named, oh my goodness, Tufte, Mr. Tufte. I'm having trouble. Oh, Edward Tufte is, as a matter of fact, he has blocked me on Twitter. I have that fame behind me because he has made a living out of telling us that PowerPoint is responsible for bad presentations, when we all know it's not PowerPoint. It's the planning that you put into PowerPoint. It's what you put on the slide that makes a bad presentation. One of those things, he coined the term called chart junk. And part of that reason is, in the old days, this was the default chart that came up in PowerPoint. It was this 3D massive grid chart with all kinds of information on it, and it makes it really hard to read. 3D in the 21st century has started to mean something else. So I've started seeing these pop up again when people think, oh, people are using 3D. This is the wrong kind of 3D that we should be using. I'm going to ask a question here. Again, I'd like you to pop in. If I were to clean up this chart, get rid of some of the chart junk, where could I start? Just throw out some suggestions.
Get rid of the fake 3D.
Get rid of the fake 3D, exactly. What was the other one? Oh, I thought I heard another one. That's okay. It's hard, you know.
When don't need the vertical lines in the grid.
Exactly. We don't need the vertical lines in the grid. Go ahead.
Get rid of the legend on the right.
Get rid of the legend. Exactly. Yep. So we've got the vertical numbers here. We've got the legend here. We've got the 3D. We've got all the grid lines. It's as simple as this. We don't need all that complexity. Another thing, notice that I changed the headline. Nursing home costs are increasing. Before it said nursing home annual private pay prices. This slide has a label for a headline. I always encourage my clients to include what I call insightful headlines, a headline that gives you insight into what the content of the graphic is, the story that is trying to be told. Thank you for your help on that one. I really appreciate it. So when it comes to chart, we don't want any chunk. Less is more when it comes to charts. Error 3 is what I call a free-for-all. This next slide is on the right track. We're trying to show that there's an industry need for telehealth, and the percentage of adults with at least one chronic illness is 50%. The percentage of deaths is 70%. All the information is there, but it's organized in kind of an awkward way. It looks a little sloppy. And one way to make things less sloppy is to work on a grid. In PowerPoint, you can turn on your grid, and there's a default one with, I think it's 1-inch squares, I can't remember anymore, or you can customize your grid with guides. That's built into PowerPoint. Or you can just work in a tiny organized manner. But here's what I did after the fact. Same content, basically, but it's on the grid. It's all organized in horizontally and vertically. Plus, I did one more thing. I shortened the subheads so that they were very, very consistent. There's a calming feeling you get looking at this versus this one. Your brain is trying to reconcile the data, the information with its position on the slide. Here we know exactly where to expect the information. And it's on a grid. Okay, so let's go. Basically, the key takeaway here is remember a grid, or if you can't do that, don't write in the margins. Give yourself some space around the slide. And do you remember, I remember Mrs. Broderius taught us that, my first grade teacher, don't write in the margins. I try to keep everything on a nice crisp center of the slide. Now let's move on to some rules for success. These are a little bit more positive. The first rule is to tell a story. And it doesn't necessarily mean, you know, it's a once upon a time or I started my business in 2001. It's not that kind of story. It's a story that helps you deliver these following elements. One, it's a purpose. Not only should your presentation purpose be defined, but each slide needs to have a purpose or it shouldn't be there. What's in it for me? How is this, now that you've defined your audience, how is this presentation, how is each slide relevant to that audience? How are you going to structure your slide, your presentation? How is it organized in order to tell that story? What is your hook? How are you going to get people so intrigued that they want to learn more? And then finally, how well are you going to deliver your presentation? So let's look at purpose. This is a real slide from a client of mine, and this is exactly how it appeared. I just scrubbed some of the information out of it. So it's called 2017 Communications Results. First, that isn't an insightful headline. I have no idea what the most important thing is, what the purpose of this slide is. It could be one of many things. Let's say the purpose of the slide is to demonstrate that our call volume varies by month. Well, let's take all the other stuff, the chart junk, out of there and show that variation by month with an insightful headline that says exactly that. Or maybe it's to show that there's a steady climb in call volume trend. So I'm showing the basic data, the inbound calls, and then I can bring in the trend line to show the effectiveness there. It depends on, again, who your audience is. You've defined that. Is this the information that they want? If they don't need that first chart with all that stuff on it, don't show it. Here's one. Here, let's say the purpose of this chart is to show that inbound call volume varies by the season. All I've done here is highlighted each quarter so that we can hone in on each of the quarters and show what the call volume was. You can see here in September, it starts to bump up. And then quarterly campaigns drive call volume. So this company sends out communications materials each quarter. And now I can say that in quarter one, we did this, and this was our call volume. In quarter two, this was our call volume because we did this. Quarter three, we did this. Again, I am targeting the information to my audience and what they need to know and what I want to accomplish. So let's go back to relevance. I'm talking about my audience here again. This is the same chart. That first chart I showed you with lines all over the place, the text at the bottom, but here I'm delivering it maybe for the CEO who needs to approve my budget. And I'm telling the CEO that in Q3, we did this campaign and these were our average calls, Q2, etc., Q3, Q4. In Q3, with the campaign that we sent out, it was so much more successful. I recommend that we reinvent that campaign and we do it every quarter because it tested high and now we can do it every quarter. So the CEO can approve it based on that information. Or now we get really graphic. I'm showing the same information, but I'm focusing on Q3. I'm saying we had 4 quarters of campaigns. Q3, we got the best calls. I suggest, CEO, that we move forward with that campaign, a similar campaign, that story, going forward with our audiences. So you can see how that evolved from being a very crowded line chart with the table at the bottom of it, no insightful headline, to a very graphic slide that hones in on my average 775 calls, and I want to move forward with that, Mr. CEO or Mrs. CEO or Ms. CEO. Structure, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but if you read Atkinson's book, he talks a lot about structure and he uses color coding to make sure that you break up your presentation, again, into chunks. And this time it's sections of your presentation. And I've defined my sections with these blue section divider slides. The hook. PowerPoint audiences are people too. Is a hook. It's, what do you mean? In that case, what do you mean they're people too? Here's another way. You're pitching a new program to the decision makers in your organization, and you say to them, what if we could save time and money and increase collaboration with our new SharePoint installation? That's a hook. It's not rather than saying our 2021 recommendations for SharePoint installation. That's a label. We want a hook. Then finally, delivery. Delivery should vary by who you're talking to, what the objectives of the presentations are. Is your tone going to be humorous? Is your tone going to be energetic and motivating? Is it going to be, I'm delivering information and I need a decision? Those are all things that you need to consider based on the people that are in the audience. And very importantly, practice, 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 practice your delivery. That not only makes you feel better when you go into it, but it demonstrates to your audience that you are committed to excellence and that you care enough about them to have a succinct and professional delivery. So that is telling a story. And telling a story allows you to connect with your audience and compel them to act on whatever you want the desired outcome to be. This next rule for success that we should all embrace, this is one that I want you to remember. I want you to remember everything. But if you come away with anything tonight, it's one concept per slide rule. And here's what I mean by that. This is not a bad slide. Again, it follows my, 3 to 5 words, 3 to 5 bullet points rule. The headline is insightful, but the key information is getting lost in this slide. So when I look at it, I think this is actually a candidate for an entire section of a presentation. We conducted a study. And so I'm going to give you a presentation, a section of this presentation about the study, and I'm going to talk to you about the methods we employed and the results. We know that med errors have increased by 20%. So we set off to conduct a research study across 23 states, and among those 23 states, we reached out to 1,800 different hospitals. Notice there is not a bullet point on either of these slides. So that makes this, I'm going to go back, this bullet point slide, one slide. Now I've broken it up into 3 or 4 different slides, and I want to address this. Someone will say, that makes my presentation longer. It does not make your presentation longer. It breaks up. If you're going to talk about each of these elements on this slide, now you're breaking it up into one concept per slide. Takes just as long to deliver the information, and very importantly, it makes it easier for the audience to follow along. And finally, and I've been using this throughout my presentation, rule 3 is using visual anchors. This is a visual anchor. I can talk to it as the content expert of this research study to say that we conducted research in 23 states, and I can talk to that. Now, if we go back to that dual coding concept, you're listening to me, looking at the graphic, and talking about the 23 states. Here's another visual anchor, and this is something I believe most of you are going to be familiar with in this room. And, you know, in my world, it's not pretty, but what this is all about is legibility and getting the information across. So I'm going to spend just a little bit of time of showing you how different ideas, if you haven't already tried them, to being able to share this kind of visual anchor. So one way is to have the whole page, whole slide, have the content in it, hopefully big enough for somebody to follow along and to maybe use your cursor, or, oh, I didn't turn on my fun little tool. Shoot, I have the tool where you can zoom things, and you can use that with your mouse. But here's another way, just highlighting a section, the section that you want. So all the other content is still there, but I've highlighted what we need to pay attention to. Or I take that section and I just blow it up. We don't need to worry about anything else. Let's just focus on this content. And again, I can use my cursor or whatever tool you might have to zoom in on this. You could even individually highlight each of the important elements. I don't know if you saw that one. This is an animated slide that calls people's attention to what you want to focus on. So when I click, everything else screens back and I'm focusing on that particular section of the code. Or I can blow that out. I can screen everything back and blow this out. This is all done with cropping, taking the image of the code page and cropping it out, and then using PowerPoint shapes and creating a group. And I think I'm using the wipe up animation to create this pop out. Another way is to show if you want to show the immense volume of data, is to use scrolling technique. So here I'm just scrolling up, and I don't know if it's smooth on your end. It just depends on our how fast our respective internets are. But what I did here was I scrolled down to where I wanted to show the information, and I'm blowing that out. I use this a lot when I'm using helping my clients show screenshots of their websites, for example, and they start with the home page, and then we scroll it up and we get to the content that they actually want to show. It's a very, very effective technique. The other that I know it's not always ideal, but live demos, I think you just can't beat live demos. If you have that opportunity to show it in real time, that's really, really effective. So let's move on to some before and after slides. Chris was willing to share with me some of the slides that he created. And that's always kind of gutsy. I'll tell you what, his slides are really good. Okay, he follows the rules, the examples of the code he has on there. It's very easy to focus on it. Basically, the suggestions I'm making are following some of the provenance rules, you know, vicinity, a little bit more design to it. Really good job, Chris. So I really don't have a lot of suggestions for you other than some basic design. So here we go. And I think Megan, probably everyone gets a little self-conscious when they see themselves in a slide, but this is the before slide. And this is all I'm suggesting afterward. Oh, it repeated. Is that we just do something like this. Chris has taken the background out of her photo. It's perfect for this kind of a layout. It creates that that law of vicinity where we have her large photo on the right and the headline on the left, and it all works together really, really well. Similarly, another great slide, but how can we tie that together to be easier to read so that people can see the graphic and the text in context? And this is all I'm suggesting. And really, I just took the photo, I changed the background of the slide using the color, the fill color dropper to make sure that it was a dark color. I guess you can see a little bit of a line there, but created this slide here as the after. And here we go, Chris. One thing, when I work with clients and if I'm doing a cleanup job, I make them walk through the presentation with me so that I can understand their objectives for each slide, and that helps me make smart recommendations for design. Chris and I didn't have that opportunity, so this next one, Chris, may not be appropriate for you, but here's what I did to change it. I wanted to create that balance between the copy and the graphic, but I didn't take anything off of here. What I did was move your logos down here. I put a nice drop shadow so that it looks like you're coming off of the slide. All the links that you had, I put into these graphics here. So if you needed to link to them, you certainly could click on this graphic. You could click on this GitHub graphic. You could click on this takes you to your LinkedIn page and your Stack Overflow user page. So just, again, started out with a great slide. I just took it to the next level, adding some design elements there. You know what? I didn't change this one. And this gets me back to saying all the elements here, how to use Xamarin Essentials. Add the platform setup code and permissions. These are insightful. It's an insightful headline. It's a great subhead, and we can see the code very, very easily. If anything, if I would have changed anything, I might have wanted to put this on white just to make the contrast a little stronger. But again, we didn't have a chance to talk about it. I think this is a great slide. Oh, and highlighted the important information. So as we hone in on the end of the presentation, and then we're going to have some answer questions. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I have 3 steps to more powerful slides. And as I mentioned earlier, they have nothing to do with PowerPoint. The first step is to write your script. You can write it. Handwriting is awesome. When you're using your hand to write something, I know it takes forever, but you're using a different part of your brain. You can be a lot more creative writing your script. Or you can write it in a Word document. Or you can write it in the notes area of PowerPoint, but not on your slide. Okay? Think about the story that you want to tell. And it can change. From there, you're going to take your script, and I should clarify, when I say script, I'm not proposing that you memorize anything. It's just to get everything down that's important in writing. You shouldn't be doing that at the end before your presentation. You should be doing it before you even start creating your slides. So take that information from your script and pull a key insight from that script and put it on a slide. Now you can open PowerPoint if you want to and start putting it on a slide, but preferably you have an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper and you're just going to write down your headline on that paper. What this allows you to do, I don't know if you've heard of the war room environment, but putting all these up on a wall or a table, a desk, whatever, allows you to then, if each of those are individual headlines, move things around, move the story around, construct the story, and start to get things solidified before you create your slides. And then draw that visual anchor. So now when you have that, your war room wall, you're sketching things, and they don't have to be pretty. Look at this, you know. Now we have my headline becomes "A Tree Grows in Brooklyn," and I've changed it in real time. And then the next slide is this person walking, and the next slide, you know what, I think I'm going to need a PowerPoint chart. All of this is helping you before you even get into PowerPoint. And at this point, you can start creating your slides. If you need help, you can reach out for help for certain things. If you need a photo, you can buy the photo to fill it in, but all the hard work is done. I have something for you, but and it's these two storyboard PDFs. And you can, I've got one that really helps in that war room environment. It's the one on the left. It's called the One-Up Storyboard. And if you use this, oh, I wonder, let's see. Shoot, I thought I had a link that I could put in. I'll make sure you get a link if this isn't working for you. But you can, this link will give you access to the One-Up Storyboard for the war room environment, or the traditional 6-up storyboard, which allows you to number your slides, draw your headlines and your sketches, write even some notes down here. Both of them allow you to do that. Those are free to you to use, to access as you'd like. And if you have any trouble with this code, QR code, let me know and I will put a link into the chat. And as a last, I'm going to ask you a question. Do you remember, actually, do you remember what I said of anything? What do I want you to remember from this presentation?
Don't read the slides.
That's one. The one I said was, what?
Audience.
Nope, that I said, if there's anything I want you to remember, it's this. Does anyone remember the one concept per slide? That's what that's what I want you to remember. But whoever answered that question first, this is my storyboard book. It's a complete book. I've got little Post-it notes that allow you to move things around. I don't know if you can see this. I've got markers, Post-it notes. I've got the storyboards inside. Make sure I get your mailing address and I will send that to you for free. But of course, you have access to the other PDFs via this QR code. So let's chat. We've got 10 minutes. Are there any questions? Any thoughts? Disagree? Do you disagree with anything I said? Did I forget something?
I like what you did to my slides.
Oh, good. Well, I'll send them to you if you want to use them.
How do you come up with a?
Excuse me? Someone said, how do you come up with? Oh, I think we lost. So, Linda, were you going to ask a question?
Just a real quick one. First of all, I have to say, just wonderful watching your presentation. You espouse what you teach so beautifully. It was gorgeous. I did not catch the first reference you made to the fellow that was so instrumental to you learning about teaching and how the memory works.
Absolutely. You want to, his name is Richard Mayer, M-E-Y-E-R.
Okay.
and the name of his book is, it's the Cambridge Handbook of Multimedia Learning.
Okay, I got the Cambridge part, but I didn't catch the rest. Cambridge Book of Multimedia Learning?
Exactly, exactly. And then Cliff, of course, you know, he takes that and makes it
just
palatable.
that
Yes.
would go way beyond, but that was brilliant. I love that. Your eye of the needle and all of it. So fabulous. I've learned, as always, so much from you. Thanks.
you.
I'm going to let the rest of the group get in. Just a
Thanks,
joy.
Linda.
Thank you.
So good to see you.
Yeah, I accidentally muted myself when I was asking the question. How do you come up with the color palettes that you use for your presentation?
I use, there are built-in color themes in PowerPoint, so you can choose from those if you'd like, or oftentimes my clients dictate my color palette, or I use a tool, an online Adobe tool called, used to be called Cooler Color, but I don't know what it's called now, Kuler. And I know it's called something else now. For a while, it was the Adobe Color Wheel. And but if you type in Cooler, Kuler, you'll get suggestions for color themes. Is it showing up?
It's now color.adobe.com.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Anybody, do you need that QR? Do you need the link? I could try to get that link in there too. Otherwise, I might send it as a follow-up too.
Yeah, I can always add it to the meetup page.
Perfect. Okay, perfect. Hi, Jackie. I see some familiar faces here. Nice to see you, Jackie. Or not see you, but hear you. Well, I think that might be it. I don't want to cut anybody off, but if there aren't any more questions, we certainly can call it a night.
Well, thank you very much, Sandy.
It's my pleasure. I always have fun doing this. And if you ever have any questions, you can reach out to me.